YouTube. And so everybody that is not here, you want to share it with friends and family, we'll be able to do that. So yeah, thanks, Leo. Just a little glitch, but we got through it and we're okay now. So you're coming up. We've got you up on the big screen here, and everybody can see you real well. We're going to hit on a couple topics with Leo, and we're going to spend a few minutes concerning Leo's trip to South Dakota. Then we're going to talk about Marco Rubio's Senate Resolution number 118, tell you what that's all about. And then we're going to end with an article that Leo just wrote today about the South African farmers and how they're going to be being persecuted or wiped out. So, Leo, let's start with your trip to South Dakota. And you did go with two friends of ours, and those friends were.
Yeah, I flew out to South Dakota at the invitation of State Senator Neil Tapio. Myself and Phil Haney and Jim Simpson went out there to testify for a bill that Senator Tapio had introduced at the state capitol there that would have placed a moratorium on refugee resettlement in that state from any countries that have been on President Trump's travel ban. So that included 11 countries, and Iran was one of them. Somalia was another one, and that was really the key country, Somalia, because most of the 4,500 refugees that have been pumped into Sioux Falls, South Dakota over the last 10 years have come from Somalia. And basically, this is what happened. We testified before a 10-person Senate committee, the Committee on State Affairs, which was chaired by Senator Bob Ewing, a Republican. There were 8 Republicans and 2 Democrats on this committee. And all 3 of us were given 1 hour, 50 minutes to be exact, to testify, 20 minutes each, in favor of Senator Tapio's bill. And then the pro-refugee people were given the same amount of time to testify against the bill. What really happened, to make a long story short, Phil started out with the constitutional and vetting the constitutional ramifications of refugee resettlement, the way it's been enacted, the difficulties in vetting the refugees, and then Jim Simpson was up next, and he concentrated on the costs of refugee resettlement, which, as you know, are astronomical, heavy welfare use, and he had all of this documented, both nationally and for South Dakota. He was followed by myself. Neil wanted me to go last because he felt like my testimony would have the highest emotional impact. And what I did, Gary, was simply document all of the atrocities committed by Somalis over the last 5 years in Minnesota, in the Dakotas, in Utah, Rhode Island, Vermont, Ohio, basically everywhere the Somalis have gone, they have wreaked havoc on our society in terms of violence, violent crime, terrorism, and fraud, defrauding the government. So I only got halfway through I had a list of 30 violent crimes committed by Somali refugees. And I only got halfway through my list, and Chairman Ewing cut me off and said he'd heard enough. I was giving him a, quote, history lesson that didn't stick close enough to the bill at hand. And so I just blurted out, "You don't want to hear the truth."
Oh.
And from what I understand, there was an audible gasp in the Senate chamber room where this hearing was being held. And interestingly, the headline atop the biggest newspaper in South Dakota that night was my quote, "You don't want to hear the truth." And it was an actually very fair article. But this is what happened. It only lasted online for 38 minutes, and it was taken down and completely rewritten, and none of our names were even mentioned in the article. Phil Haney, myself, or Jim Simpson, and it was completely from the rewritten from the pro-refugee side. And of course, this committee voted down the bill 9-1. Only one member voted in favor of Tapio's bill to get it out of committee. So it was basically killed in committee.
Yeah,
And my sense was that they all had their minds made up before the testimony was even given.
sure. So, when you say South Dakota, I think of farmland, cows, open, farmers, good people, cowboy hats, horses. What brings the Somalis to South Dakota? Why would they want that?
That's actually a good question. It is solely the meat packing industry. Uh, they Lutheran Social Services South Dakota has a resettlement office in Sioux Falls where, as I said, they have pumped 4,500 refugees into that state over the last 10 years. But they don't all stay in Sioux Falls. A lot of them migrate to Aberdeen, which is about 100 miles, I think, east of Sioux Falls.
Okay.
And they go there to work in the meat packing plant. There is a beef plant there called Demcoda, and they hire at least 10% or so of their staff, of their employees, are Somali refugee labor, cheap labor. And the Chamber of Commerce was there to testify against Tapio's bill, against us. Lutheran Social Services sent their top dog, Betty Oldenkamp, to testify. There were churches, there were, church pastors, all testifying against the bill and in favor of refugees. It really was a circus. I'm telling you, it was a complete setup. And I do believe they all, as I said, 8 Republicans and 2 Democrats had their minds made up before they even listened to the facts. They didn't want to hear the facts. And this is exactly, I know, what you've encountered there in Michigan as well.
Yes. Yeah, just restate, when Leo and I talked, I said 3 years ago, I think it was, maybe so, that Dick Manasiri and I went in on behalf of Senator Patrick Colbeck. It was right after the large Paris attack that took place, and that's when we wanted to pause Syrian refugees from coming in to the country, and especially into Michigan, because they were unvettable. So we went and testified on behalf of Senator Patrick Colbeck. Colbeck had a bill, a resolution to do just that, pause it. Same as Leo, we were sitting in front of 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, headed up by Arlen Meekoff, and Patrick Colbeck gave his testimony. Dick and I just gave numbers, how many coming in, where they're going. Lutheran Social Services and Catholic Social Services are bringing these people in, getting paid per head, and I'll make it real quick. And we were called racist by Senator Hood. Meekoff told Colbeck after that half-hour hearing, I gave you your hearing, it is done, it is finished, see you later. And just as Leo encountered, there was Dawood Walid of CARE there, the Catholics, the Jews, the Lutherans, you name it, they were in lockstep line, one after another, against us.
That was actually, you're right, the one that I forgot to mention who was also lined up against us was Tanisa Islam. And she is a CARE-affiliated attorney who's very active in Minnesota and the Dakotas. She showed up to testify against us. And so you have this Republican-dominated state Senate with a Republican-dominated committee who would rather listen to Tanisa Islam of CARE and the Chamber of Commerce than it would to 3 experts who've studied this program for years, and one of whom, Phil Haney, who was actually involved in screening Somali refugees, for years when he worked with DHS. Unbelievable.
And yeah, it's just like you said, don't you want to hear the truth?
Right.
Uh, so just to take a couple more minutes on this, I guess is it, how do you think about that, Leo, that they don't want to hear the truth? Is it that they think you're wearing the tinfoil hat, or, what is it? Why don't they want to hear the truth?
Well, I, as I sat there, I had a direct view of one of the female senators. Um, she was looking, and looked very interested and actually moved by what I was saying, because I was bringing up cases where women were raped in the back of a bus. Another woman in Aberdeen, South Dakota, was raped while sitting out front of a group home in a wheelchair. Uh, that was actually an attempted rape. The guy, the Somali refugee, walked up and had his hand up between her legs when the caretaker came out and caught him. There were shootings, there were stabbings, there were rapes. It went on and on and on, and I could tell she actually had. I could see the concern in her eyes, but I don't feel like she or some of the others on there felt like they had a choice but to kill this bill. I think they were told by their leadership beforehand that you will not vote for this bill if you want to continue with your committee assignments that you need to represent, to bring state funds back to your hometown and stuff like this. Another woman who was a senator up on the committee, who was a realtor by profession, she actually spoke and said why she was voting against it. The woman I was referring to earlier, looking into my eyes with concern, never said a word. But the other lady said, I just don't want us to be seen in South Dakota as unwelcoming.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that quote unquote, right? Yeah.
And that was her reason why she couldn't support the bill.
And
So there
yeah,
you
that's
have
what
it.
they say, that's not who we are. The
Right,
Democrats will throw that out at you. Well,
right.
that was, thank you for taking that trip. That's, a long way from Georgia where you live now. And Philip Haney, Jim Simpson lives on the East Coast, and they're friends of ours. So
Yes.
thank
I
you for,
also want to put in one last thing on this, a good word for Senator Neil Tapio.
yeah,
Please write his name down. He is running for Congress, U.S. Congress, uh, and he will be running in the primary this coming fall. And he needs any support he can get. He is a good man. He really gets it on this issue.
yeah,
And he has come out on it. He's walked out on a really thin limb in South Dakota. Nobody, there's no friends really when you take up this issue. You learn that real quick in the state capitol. And even those who are your friends, who do agree with you on this issue, they will not speak out publicly to defend you when the media and all the others come out to attack you like cockroaches. So really keep them in your prayers, you know, and maybe send them a little check or something as we get into the race. But thank you so much for supporting us on that.
no problem. Yeah, let's move on to the other topic that when we first started talking, you brought this up with me, which I never knew about it. Shh, never knew about it. Uh, I printed out the resolution here. It's, and I'll just read just a little bit of it. U.S. Congress Senate Resolution 118. The summary is a resolution condemning hate crime and any other form of racism, religious or ethnic bias, discrimination, incitement to violence, or targeting a minority in the United States. Condemns hate crime and any other form of racism, religious or ethnic bias, discrimination, incitement to violence, and so on. So you get the gist. So Leo, you came across this. It was put together by Marco Rubio. And how dangerous is this? And give us a little more in depth as far as what this resolution could be or could become.
Yeah, what I decided to do, since you just summarized the resolution, first of all, I will say this is a resolution, okay, not a law. So think of this as one thing we know the left is very good at, you think about the gun control issue, the same-sex marriage, all of the issues we care about, they're very good at incrementalism. One step at a time, like the proverbial frog in the warm water. They just turn the heat up a little bit each time. And so this I see as an extremely dangerous first step towards an eventual hate speech law, similar to what we have seen used against citizens in the UK, Germany, Sweden, and now Canada. They're arresting people. They're on witch hunts in the UK and Germany right now, looking for people and actually arresting them for saying things. Speech, folks. This is not acts. This is speech. Saying things that are considered offensive to Islam. And this is the first step. Marco Rubio and his cohort, Dianne Feinstein, along with Susan Collins, another rhino Republican out of Maine, have conjured up this resolution. And you might say, well, it doesn't have the force of law. Don't kid yourself. It is setting the table. It is laying the foundation for an eventual law like they have in Britain, Germany, Sweden, Canada. And I'm going to take you through now what these laws didn't pop up out of nowhere. I'm going to quickly try to take you through a little bit of history and show you where this emanates from. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation. How many people know what that is? It's called the OIC. It is the most powerful voting bloc in the United Nations. It's a 57-state bloc of Muslim-majority countries that work together to get things passed through the UN. And the OIC has been on a 17-year mission to criminalize what they call Islamophobia. And they want to do this by implementing basically what are the global blasphemy, implementing Islamic blasphemy laws on a global basis, especially within the Western democracies. They already have these blasphemy laws, in the Muslim majority countries. They want them in our countries. And you might say, well, how does this happen? They do it under the guise of hate speech laws and hate crimes. None of these hate crimes can you currently get away with right now under existing law. If I go out and commit a crime against a black person or a Muslim, I'm going to be arrested and do the time. There's no reason for a specialized hate crime. And hate crimes are a stepping stone as well. Once the hate crime is passed, the next step is hate speech law. That is when you can get arrested merely for saying something or writing something. Okay, so in 1999, it goes back to, the OIC began to promote the concept of what they call defamation of religion. This this does not merely include a defamation of individual Muslim people, but an entire religion. Think about it. There are 1.5 billion Muslims on the planet. If you say something that offends some of them or most of them, the OIC wants that to be a punishable crime. And they started talking about that in 1999. By 2005, the OIC adopted what it called a 10-year strategic action plan to overcome Islamophobia, where they laid out more details on their vision for a clampdown on free speech globally. And they were trying at this point also to get the UN Human Rights Council to pass Resolution 1618. They tried that really since 9/11, and they could not get it passed. This is basically a global blasphemy law, where speech deemed offensive to Islam would be a punishable crime. Well, along comes Hillary Clinton in 2011, She's the Secretary of State. She works her magic at the UN, and finally they get it passed. In March 2011, the UN adopts Human Rights Resolution 1618, in which they encourage all nations of the world to pass laws punishing anyone who speaks or writes things offensive to religious organization, to all the world's religions. They don't name specific religions, but what's the only religion in the world that's concerned about itself being defamed?
Yeah.
There's only one. I don't know if Christianity ever. Do you hear the Pope going around accusing people of being Christianophobes or Christophobes? I don't think so. I've never heard of a Hinduophobe, or what about a Buddhistophobe? Only Islamophobes are in the sights of the UN Resolution 1618. Okay, and then in July 2011, the OIC launched what it called the Istanbul process in cooperation with the US and Hillary Clinton. You can research that online, but it was basically the implementation plan for Human Rights Resolution 1618. Then in November 2011, the U.S., under pressure from CARE, ISNA, and 50 other Muslim organizations, scrubbed FBI and DHS training manuals of all references to Islam deemed offensive to those Muslim organizations. Interesting, isn't it? Then comes flash forward to December 2015. Loretta Lynch, our Attorney General at the time, if any of y'all remember what happened in December 2015, San Bernardino terrorist attack. I believe it was 14 people killed at an office Christmas party by a couple of Islamic terrorists. Loretta Lynch came out in the wake of that terror attack and threatened to prosecute any American who spoke ill of Islam in such a way that, or Muslims, in such a way that she said edged towards violence. Now, who can decide or know what speech will edge someone somewhere towards violence? She had to walk those comments back when some of her own leftist attorneys, I think one was at Stanford, a law professor, said, wait a minute, we don't think this squares with the Constitution. And so she had to walk back those comments, but she threw that out there like a test to see if she could get away with it. December 6th, 2016, the OIC issues what it calls its media strategy for countering Islamophobia, with specific focus on the US, UK, and Europe. And about that same time, ProPublica, which is a nonprofit US journalism agency, they started a project, an anti-Islamophobia project, where they said there's been a lot of Islamophobia going on, so we're going to start cataloging it and sharing these stories, the investigative articles that we produce, with local newspapers across the country. And so we start seeing local newspapers becoming, I spent almost 30 years working for local newspapers. One thing they're terrified of is CARE and lawsuits. And and so you just mentioned CARE and they go running for the door. They're afraid to report it. And so ProPublica teamed up with CARE. That's who they were getting their reports on Islamophobia from. We know how accurate those reports are.
Yeah.
Okay. Also around this time, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, came out and at a joint news conference with the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, and he's surrounded by Saudi royals. He says at this news conference that that Islamophobia and Islamophobic comments in, quote, some parts of the world are fueling a rise in global terrorism. I think that was a veiled reference to President Trump and others. So it's our fault that they're killing us. Somebody ought to tell Mr. Gutierrez that Islamic terrorism predates Donald Trump.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
you know, and it was a bizarre comment. Um, and so then comes the big one. April 5th, that you mentioned, April 5th, 2017, U.S. Senate unanimously passes Senate Resolution 118, calling for punishments and investigations and everything against hate crimes targeted towards religious minorities. It would be one thing if they passed this exact same resolution that you read and it applied to all faiths. But it mentions Muslims, Jews, blacks, Hindus, and Sikhs. It's okay apparently to launch a hate crime against Christians. This is possibly the most anti-Christian piece of legislation I have ever seen come out of our Congress. It is truly astonishing, outrageously anti-Christian and anti-American, because it picks select groups and says you're not allowed to say to say something or do something that could be considered insightful against these groups, but only these groups. It's okay if you incite violence against Christians, apparently, according to Marco Rubio's resolution. But it shouldn't be surprising, I guess, when you consider who drafted the bill for Mr. Rubio and Ms. Feinstein. It was two Muslim organizations called MGAGE and MPAC. MPAC stands for the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and both of these groups are tied to the extremist Muslim Brotherhood. So
So just to restate that, Leo. So Marco Rubio, I guess, gets together with those two groups you just mentioned and says, hey, this might be a good idea for us to introduce to quell this hate crimes or hate speech, because I think it's a good idea. They help him write the legislation. Who's the
yeah,
American here? You look at something like that and you just can't get it again. Just like when you were speaking to the South Dakota reps, you can't fit two and two together. It just doesn't make sense.
no, and we don't know if Rubio contacted them, or I would guess it may have gone the other way around. Someone from MGAGE and MPAC contacted Rubio and Feinstein and got them into a room and said, you know what? There's a lot of Islamophobia going on around the world and around the country right now. Look at what the UN Secretary General said a few months back. There's a rise in global terrorism that's being fueled by Islamophobia and President Trump and all these Islamophobes, and we've got to do something to cool it down. So look at what the other countries have done. My goodness, Sweden, Germany, the UK, Canada, they've all passed laws against hate speech that is considered Islamophobic. Can't we get you in the U.S. to at least pass a resolution? I would love to have been a fly on the wall during that meeting. We don't know what was said, but we know what they did. And what they did was very anti-American, because it tries to chill free speech in a country that has the First Amendment. These other countries don't have a First Amendment. We do. It's almost like a sacred right in this country that you're allowed to say what you feel, especially about politics and religion and controversial things. That's the whole reason. If it wasn't controversial, you wouldn't need a First Amendment. If you were saying things that were popular with everybody, why would you need a First Amendment? We know these things are controversial, but we think they're important, and that's why we speak out about them. And no, we don't ever want any violence against anybody, and we never, ever encourage that. But does that mean that we can't quote things from the Quran about the Prophet Muhammad that might be, a little unflattering? A woman just got sent to prison in the UK for talking about things that were in the Quran that Muhammad did and tying it to rapes that occurred in her community in the UK, Muslim rape gangs, you know, and she said this is why they do it. She got 36 weeks in prison.
Gee. Do
So,
we,
this is where it's leading.
do we see that happening with Twitter and Facebook? And I think I saw an article, read a bit about it. Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, was speaking in Silicon Valley or sent a message to a meeting that they had to say, Twitter and Facebook, it's your responsibility to quell hate speech. Am I getting that right?
I don't know about the link to Sadiq Khan, but I can tell you that Facebook and Twitter have definitely stepped up their policing of so-called Islamophobic speech on social media, and to a ridiculous level. And I actually had a personal experience with that just last week. I went to post on a friend's comment where she was asking where this stuff comes from. And I went to post. I said, well, it comes from in our own country. I said, mark my words. I said, within 5 years, we will see attempts, hopefully not successful, to pass not just resolutions, but laws banning speech that's deemed offensive to Islam or Muslim people. And she said, where do you get this from? And I went, and that post went through. My next post was to give a link to the U.S. Senate website for Marco Rubio's Senate Resolution 118. Facebook would not let me post it. I got a notice saying this post has been marked as spam. You will not be allowed to post it. And I've got friends who've had experiences just this week with Twitter, making them actually delete. One woman had to delete up to a dozen tweets, and she had her account canceled for I think she said 10 days.
Was that Ann Corcoran?
No.
Okay, because I thought I saw Ann Corcoran, Refugee Resettlement Watch, that she was put on notice or had some of her tweets scrutinized.
This is outrageous too, but there's really not anything we can do because Facebook and Twitter are private companies. They can decide to ban whoever they want to ban, and we know they're biased. But when our own government starts doing it, that's when it goes too far. That's when the First Amendment comes into play, folks.
Right. So if we can just end with this, Leo, on the resolution here. So it's a resolution. Did the full Senate vote to pass the resolution, or just how does that, was it just the committee that passed the resolution?
My understanding is it was a consent vote, unanimous.
Okay.
Now, and then the very next day, a companion bill was introduced in the House. That bill was introduced by Barbara Comstock, Republican out of Virginia. That bill has gone nowhere. It hasn't made it out of the subcommittee, I don't believe. Thank God. But see, this is why our elections are so important. Our midterm elections coming up. What if the House goes Democrat? They will pass this resolution and probably try to introduce maybe even a law. That President Trump would never sign it, I don't believe, but they would definitely pass this resolution. So if it hadn't been for the House, both houses of Congress would have passed this resolution. But due to the heavily Republican House, it died there.
But just to end, they're very patient. The left, the socialists, the communists, Islam, you said 1999, they've been going at this. So they're going to be patient. Now that they've got the resolution, it's there. And it's just waiting to fester. So
and they've got the resolution. And like I said, I believe in my heart of hearts that it's not just a resolution. It is the foundation for a future law that will be brought up again at the first opportunity.
Okay, let's move on to our third topic. And if we can, I see it's almost 10:02 here. Uh, the South African farmers, you just posted an article today, which I browsed over quickly. Uh, Tell us what's happening there. Because I'm thinking, when I think of South Africa, I'm thinking of Nelson Mandela. Everything's good, harmony, everything is beautiful. That's the best part of Africa you can think of. What's going on?
Right. It was supposed to be the Rainbow Nation. Remember, where blacks, whites, mixed races, and Asians were supposed to live together in harmony and have shared prosperity, right?
Yep.
Well, Mandela's ANC party took power, as you know, in 1996, and it's been a steady erosion of land rights ever since for white farmers in that country. Uh, at one point, the 20% of South Africa was white. By the mid 80s or so, it was down to 16%. At 1996, power was given to the ANC. The population of whites is now down to 8%. So a lot have already left, but those who remain are now under extreme danger of violence. Many have been killed. You don't read about it in the mainstream media, but if you research it, you will find that there have been many horrific, bloody murders of white farmers in that country. I don't even want. I can't even describe some of them. It would really make your ears bleed. But do we don't have a lot of time, so I do really urge everyone in the audience to read my article that was just posted about an hour or two ago at leohohmann.com, because it will really set the stage and give you a knowledge of what's going on there. But the bottom line is, the country, just a couple of weeks ago, the parliament voted to have an amendment to its constitution which would allow the expropriation of white-owned land without compensation. So they will basically, if this amendment, it has to go through one more stage of their parliamentary process to get final approval, but it's been given initial approval, and if it goes final, the government will be allowed to seize all of their land and drive them off by violence if necessary, without compensation. And so they've really set the stage for a bloodbath there, similar or even possibly worse than what we saw happen in Zimbabwe about 10 years ago.
But like I say, I'm thinking of South Africa as a very modernized country, or the Southern Africa there, that the big buildings, business, commerce
Right.
taking place. It's not, the Congo or Kenya or
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
like that.
I'm afraid it may be reverting to that soon, because they've it's basically under Marxist rule, and we know what happens when a country. Look at Venezuela. We know what happens when a country succumbs to Marxist rule. The free market no longer decides, where products go or anything. Everything is centrally planned for the benefit of a few and the enslavement of the masses. And that's what we see happening. They passed the law in 1998 in South Africa, where a company doing business with the government, a contracting, cannot have its employment anymore. Its employment must mirror exactly the racial makeup of the country as a whole. So if 8% of South Africa is white, only 8% of the company's employees can be white. And so what has happened as a result is there's been massive layoffs of the most qualified engineers and scientists from a lot of these companies. And so it's affecting their utility systems, their water system. You hear about the droughts and the water system, but you never hear in the mainstream media why that is. They've had to fire their most qualified personnel to comply with this Marxist law. So and they've already got sections of the country where it's illegal for whites to own land. But this new constitutional amendment would spread that nationwide. There would be no white ownership of land allowed anywhere in the country, and this would be and the ringleader of this, his name is Julius Malema. He actually called these white landowners who've been on this land sometimes 7, 8, 9 generations. He called them criminals, and that they must be driven off. And he said anyone who supports them are criminals. This is an open invitation for a bloodbath in this country. And so they really are at risk. And the whole point of the story that I wrote today is pleading with President Trump to take a look, to take notice of what's going on in South Africa and get these whites out of there as refugees. Qualify them as refugees and do an airlift to get them out of there before they're slaughtered.
And the leaders of South Africa were voted into their positions of power.
Correct.
Okay, yeah. All right. Leo, let's open it up for some questions here, and we'll keep you for about 5 more minutes or so. Is that okay?
Absolutely. I'll
Okay.
be happy to do it.
So does anybody have a question for Leo or anything? Yes, sir, Ryan. In Did you hear that, Leo?
No. Can
Here,
you
wait a
repeat
minute.
it?
Yeah. Repeat that again to me. Why don't you come up here? Yeah. We're going to bring Ryan up. He's speaking technical for me here. There you go.
Hello, sir.
Ryan L.
Hi, Ryan.
Meet you. Okay, so you talked about how legislation has put us, sort of behind or it's going to soon. Is there any sort of positive legislation that could either balance out, make us back to equal, or even kind of protect us from future issues?
None that I know of. That's the short answer.
Yeah.
That is a good question, though, because one of the things that, President Trump has slowed down this massive influx of the refugees and some of the visa holders and whatnot from these dangerous areas of the country. That's good. But we need to reform our laws. We need to look at the Refugee Act of 1980. Go in there and look at that, because it's being exploited by these resettlement agencies, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, World Relief, who get paid by the head. We need to stop paying them by the head. If they want to bring refugees here, fine, but they need to raise the money themselves and stop getting paid by U.S. tax dollars by the head for every refugee they bring in here, and then go on Capitol Hill and lobby in favor of they have a conflict of interest. They should not be allowed to be paid with tax dollars and then go and lobby for more of those tax dollars, to feather their own nest, so to speak.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir. Yeah, come on up real quick. Yeah, thank you. And your name?
Paul Dirks.
Oh, yeah, Paul. This is Paul Dirks, Leo.
How do you do?
Hi, Paul.
My question is, the reason that all these politicians and all these organizations are doing what they're doing, are they getting funded by Saudis or other big oil interests?
Oh, yeah. That is an excellent point, and I think everybody knows the answer to it. There's a lot of not only Saudi money out there, but Muslim Brotherhood money, and United Arab Emirates and Qatar and all these Gulf states. They're flush with cash, and what businessman doesn't like to get in on a little cash?
Yeah.
So you have the businesses making money. You have the universities making money. They're giving endowments to Georgetown and Yale for Islamic studies programs to indoctrinate our youth. Everybody wants to be in on the money game. And that includes, of course, politicians. And so my opinion is that we have a lot of traitors in our government, basically, who are accepting this cash. Not to mention, of course, our businesses, which are represented by the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah. Okay, let's take maybe one more or two more for you, Leo. Yes, sir. This is like coming to speak to the teacher, right? You know, everybody, but they gotta genuflect before they come and speak to you, all right?
Oh, I need to genuflect to you guys.
Walter Kubiak, Leo. All these states where the Somalis have migrated to,
Uh-huh.
are the people getting together and speaking up?
You know, that's a good question too. Often they do, but it's too late. Uh, this again happens gradually. They bring in, maybe 100, maybe 50 or 100 the first year. You know, until they're about 5 years in, most people don't notice the ramifications in their community. They don't notice that crime is ticking up. They don't notice that, cot and other drugs are coming into their city that didn't used to come in. You know, if for those of you who don't know what cot is, it's spelled Khat, and it comes from Somalia. It's grown in Somalia. It's a substance, a narcotic, a stage 2 or 3 narcotic by the U.S. government is what it is called. They chew it it's a stimulant. There have been numerous busts at U.S. airports where this stuff comes in from first to Europe and then to the U.S., and it always ends up in Minnesota or Ohio, where the biggest Somali communities are. And then you have the problem with the terrorism, the stabbings at the Mall of America, and then you have the media corrupting what actually happened and lying about what actually happened. We could go on about this forever, but it takes a long time for these symptoms to show up, and then even when they do show up, they're covered up by the media. So people don't really rise up like they should until it's too late.
Yeah, there's crime happens every day, right?
Right.
Every day. And we should complain about that too. But these cases, we're important. We're bringing these people in here.
Right.
And paying for everything that we established them here. We give them a
make
job.
a great point. You make a great point. The leftist Democrats, whenever you talk about Somali refugees committing a lot of crime, their first reaction is, and they said this actually at the testimony in South Dakota, well, why are you focusing on that? How is that any different than the white guy sitting down at the bar in Sioux Falls who, takes out his gun and shoots somebody? Well, it doesn't take, where's your brain, guy? We're stuck with that white guy. He was born here. His parents and his grandparents were born here. But like you just said, we're bringing these people in by choice from a culture that we know does not value human freedom and the principles found in our Constitution. So it's like we're asking for more of this crime and terrorism, like we don't have enough from our own people. Of course we do. There's a lot of bad people in this country who are white, and they were born here and their grandparents were born here. We're stuck with them. But why do we need to bring in the third world crime and the third world terrorism? That's a question they never answer.
Okay, I'm going to end with this. We've got a friend of yours, Tom Mitchell, that just wants to say hi and thank you for all what you're doing. So, Tom.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Tom.
Good to put a face with a name. I
Yes.
can't thank you enough, and I want to encourage everybody here to watch leohohmann.com. I really love the article you did about our local FBI here. We're more concerned about Islamophobia than jihad terrorism.
That goes right back to the subject we talked about today, doesn't it? Islamophobia and the 17-year effort by the OIC to criminalize speech that is deemed offensive to Islam. I can't give you enough credit, you and Dick, for going to that meeting with the FBI and ferreting that out for me. And it was my honor and my privilege just to be the reporter on that.
Well, it's my honor to be a part of a team, and I can't thank you enough, Leo. You're shining a light on not only here, but around the country, and you're to be commended. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Tom, and keep up the good work, friend.
Okay, last question for you. 30 seconds. We're starting the clock. Rex Tillerson is out.
Ooh,
Mike
yeah.
Pompeo was in. Good or bad, or what do you think?
Well, that is fresh
You're down to
news today.
25 seconds now.
Yeah, that's fresh news today. But I predicted that. Yeah, actually, when I was working with WND, and
Okay.
yeah, that Tillerson would be out and Pompeo would be in. I think that's a better. I never liked the choice of Tillerson for Secretary of State. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
He's. I think he's at heart a good man. Uh, but he is a globalist. How can you be the CEO of ExxonMobil and not be a globalist?
Right.
So I don't think he really understood the Trump agenda from the start. And I think he was a good man. He never publicly ever, criticized the president. He did the best he could. But I think it's time for him to move on, and we'll see if Mr. Pompeo can do a better job. I know that he apparently has spoke to Act for America. So, if he was willing, he was taking heat on Twitter today for having spoken to Act for America, the anti-Muslim group. So maybe he is a good man for the job.
Okay. All right. I encourage everybody to go to leohohmann.com, like Tom Mitchell said. What's that? Yeah. Okay, there. Yeah, a lady here is trying to share your latest article, and they're not allowing it on Facebook. So, let you know that. So, but
Further proves our point, doesn't it?
yeah, that's right. Yep. So leohohmann.com, like Tom Mitchell said about the FBI, Tom and Dick went to a meeting with the FBI, Oakland County executives and that there. Leo wrote about that. Leo wrote about Muslim Day in Centerline Public Library that's taken part across the country. So Leo Hohmann's done a lot of good things for Michigan. He's become a friend of ours and a source for us. So let's thank Leo Hohmann for being with us.
Thank you. I just want to remind you all, too, that I am one of you all, born and raised in Roseville, Michigan, and right down the street from you there. So I'm always honored to address your group.
Okay, Leo, we're going to do this again. The Skype, knock on wood, worked out okay.
It really did. Thank you
all
so
right,
much.
Amen.
All right,
God bless
Gary.
you, Leo.
God bless you all. Take care.